just buy a Steam Deck OLED, right? I mean, beautiful OLED screen, you get a terabyte of storage in a higher end model, easy to use, good value, and it just works. So is the Steam Deck OLED the best gaming handheld, or should you go for one of these guys? We've got the MSI Claw, we've got the Lenovo Legion Go, the new ROG Ally X, as well as the original Ally, and also the original Steam Deck here. 5 of the main gaming handheld options. And I'm going to run you through the pros and cons of each to hopefully help you figure out which one you should buy. And if you do find this video useful, a cheeky like and subscribe would be fantastic, and also leave links to all of these in the description below. Let's kick off with the Steam Deck, and it's less of a question of why buy a Steam Deck and more why not. Because there are 3 big reasons why the Deck is still top of my list for most gamers out there, and that's the gorgeous OLED screen, the usability of running SteamOS rather than Windows 11, and also the price. Because this base model, the original LCD version of the Steam Deck OLED, you can pick this up for £350 for a full gaming PC. Although I would argue the new Steam Deck OLED with 1 terabyte of storage is actually the best value for what you get. So essentially, this Steam Deck OLED was a midlife update, which brought a ton of upgrades like faster RAM, faster Wi-Fi, the OLED screen with HDR, much higher brightness, and also slimmer bezels, a jump from 60 to 90 Hz, and also a much longer battery life. But what it has kept is the same 800p display, which does feel a little bit low resolution next to the competition. And while performance is impressive and a good match for the resolution, you will get a higher FPS in most games and more performance options on its rivals. The design is a bit boring. It's got this sort of prototypey industrial aesthetic, all very plastic, but basically they're all plastic. What I do appreciate though is these quite chunky grips, much more comfortable to hold, and it does also come with a case if you buy the 1 terabyte model. So not the flashiest design in the world, but it does the job. It's quite functional. But we do get a pair of touchpads, which really helps in games which favor mouse controls, plus we get extra buttons on the back and also a micro SD card slot. There's also tons of accessories out there, like larger grips, external batteries, and docks for turning this into more of a desktop gaming PC. In a way, it's hard not to compare the Steam Deck with the Switch, because like Nintendo, Valve's combined control of hardware and software in the game store mean it all just works. SteamOS is fast and easy to use with plenty of settings to customize it, and you can boot up and begin your games fast. We also get the Deck Verified system that lets you know how well games will run before you actually buy or launch them. Plus there's a control layer which maps the Deck's controls to each game, and you can customize this yourself or find alternatives made by the community. The whole thing is just awesome, and it takes a lot of the guesswork out of running games, and the best bit is you don't have to jump into Windows to switch games or adjust OS settings. Although some games with launchers or anti-cheat apps can have issues launching on the Deck. Because rather than Windows, this runs Linux OS, which also has a desktop you can access via the power button, and from here you can install apps like non-Steam launchers. And it's a good way to get your existing libraries onto the Deck so you don't feel quite so tied into your Steam library in the Steam store. The downside is that Linux doesn't have quite the same widespread app compatibility that Windows does. Although definitely give EmuDeck a try, as it turns your Steam Deck into the perfect retro console emulator. So altogether, and also factoring in the price, the Steam Deck OLED is hard to argue with as being the best gaming handheld. But what about its closest rival, which I think right now is the brand new Ally X. This is also very much a midlife refresh, like the OLED was to the original Deck over the original Ally. And while the processor and the screen hasn't changed, nearly everything else has. And the refinements add up to make it a far better experience. I mean, we're talking double the battery size, now 80 watt-hours, double the storage at 1 terabyte, 24 gigs of faster RAM, a full-size PCIe 4 SSD for cheaper and also larger drive upgrades, quieter fans, a new USB 4 port so you can connect it to external GPUs, louder speakers, and also faster 100-watt charging. Plus the controls and the grips have been improved for better comfort, and I would probably say the speakers on the Ally X are the best among all these handhelds. The downsides, though, of the Ally X are that it's a little bit thicker, a little bit heavier compared to the original, and also a little bit more expensive. But there are 2 main reasons why you should consider buying the Ally X, and that is the battery life. It is by far the best on test, and we'll come to some benchmarks in a second and side-by-side comparisons, but also the fact that this is the only gaming handheld that offers a variable refresh screen to smooth out your choppier frame rates, and it can make a big difference. But most importantly, it's that battery. The Ally X lasted over twice as long as the original Ally in my tests, and in less demanding games with a capped frame rate, you can comfortably get 4 to 5 hours. But it also gives you the option of cranking the performance up to the 25-watt turbo mode without worrying that it will kill your battery life in, 45 minutes. Now you'll get maybe an hour and a half, but still, it's like twice as long as the old one. And that's just kind of shifted my expectation of what we should expect for gaming handheld battery life. These all now need to catch up to the Ally X. Also, the fact that we have more and faster RAM results in slightly higher frame rates, or at least smoother frame rates across the board. Plus, the Armoury Crate UI is pretty straightforward to use, and you've got tons of customization options. And so far, it's been relatively crash-free, actually. I think they've ironed out a lot of the bugs with the original Ally. Also, a big update came to Armoury Crate, which also went to the old one. So I would say it's probably the smoothest, least buggy experience that you'll get on a Windows handheld. Downsides? Well, it is more expensive. This will cost you £800, same in dollars, although I suspect if it's anything like the original Ally, over the next few months we might see some good deals. Also, still an LCD screen, no OLED in sight, and for better or worse, it does still run Windows. Now, Windows on handhelds gets a bad rap, but it does give you the option of easily installing other game launchers or any of the millions of compatible apps on Windows. I mean, this can be a full desktop PC if you plug in a dock. The trouble is navigating Windows on a screen this small. Without a touchpad like the Deck and Legion Go, it's fiddly, it's unintuitive, it's just rubbish. Still, all Windows handhelds are awkward, and I've probably had the fewest issues with the Ally X. Also, with a big boost in battery life, the overall refinements, it's hard to argue that this actually isn't the best choice now, especially among the Windows competitors. But I wouldn't go as far as to say that the Ally X is a Steam Deck killer, because there's just too many advantages of this. It's cheaper, we have the OLED screen, you get a case with it. A lot of people just prefer this Linux and SteamOS setup. It's much simpler to use and far fewer crashes and bugs. It's more of the iPhone of gaming handhelds versus a technically higher-end Android phone. Just a quick note on the original Ally. If you were thinking about maybe getting a discounted one, because you can get this for about 500 quid now, 300 less than the Ally X, and it shares the same Z1 Extreme processor, same screen, and a very similar design, including the UI as well. So there are some reasons to buy it, but I probably wouldn't. For around this price, I would go with the Steam Deck OLED, and also there were some issues with earlier models, so perhaps avoid getting a pre-owned one or a used one, because there were some microSD frying issues with early units coming out on this. They did resolve that eventually. It's not an issue so far on the Ally X. But my biggest issue with this is just the battery life kind of sucks. So yeah, for that kind of money, go for an OLED. If you've got a bit more to spend, get the Ally X. So it's fair to say that ASUS had a bit of a hard time, especially at launch with the original Ally, but also MSI, they've had a bit of a tough time with this Claw, especially at launch, because there were just tons of driver issues, and the problem with most original reviews for this guy is that like a week or two later, a big driver update came out, which quite significantly improved performance actually. I've seen anything from 7 up to 30% increase in performance just through updates. It's clawing its way back, shall we say. And actually, this is the only gaming handheld that runs Windows 11 as well to not use the AMD Z1 Extreme processor. This uses an Intel chip, either the Core Ultra 5 135H with 512 gigs of storage, or the one I have here, the faster Ultra 7 155H with 1 terabytes of storage. So MSI have definitely caught up, but the frame rates are still genuinely lower than its rivals, especially in more demanding games, and especially the 1% lows. And a lot of the problem seems to stem from the graphics driver compatibility with each game, which is why Shadow of the Tomb Raider and a couple of the games were within 1 or 2 FPS of the other devices, yet Fortnite was half what I got on the other devices. And it is interesting that sometimes I'm not seeing any performance difference between balanced and performance modes, which suggests we're just having optimization issues. It's the Intel chip that just isn't that well optimized in this kind of hardware. It was a brave choice from MSI, and I would love to see an MSI Claw 2 with one of Intel's upcoming Lunar Lake chips, which is supposed to boost the graphics, the Intel Arc graphics by like 50%. So I would love to see that, but for now, the performance, the stabilization, the optimization on the Claw does hold it back. It's still Windows 11 though, and we get MSI's Center M app, which is pretty good now, even if it's not quite as slick as the others. And the design has been pretty good as well. And one advantage of this huge vent on the back here, pretty much the whole back of it is a vent, is that it does run cool and very quietly. Even on higher power modes, the overall audio experience is actually really polished. Like the Ally X, we're also getting a 1080p 120Hz screen, although it doesn't support variable refresh rates like the Ally does. But I like what MSI has done, and I think over time this will keep getting better, so it is still worth considering the MSI Claw. Ally X on the end, then the MSI Claw, Steam Deck OLED, original Ally, which means we now get to talk about the Legion Go. This is by far the most unique gaming handheld, and I kind of love it actually. By far the biggest, with an 8.8-inch 16 by 10, so a little bit taller, IPS display, meaning an almost 50% bigger screen area than the Steam Deck, and 66% larger than the Claw, Ally, and Ally X, which just makes your games feel so much more immersive. Plus it has the highest resolution, 1600p, and also the highest refresh rate at 144Hz. But then it does still use the same Z1 Extreme processor as the original Ally and also the Ally X, and actually I think with the boost in RAM and the faster RAM on there, you'll get a slightly smoother performance out of the Ally X. And also, as nice as this screen is, it is still LCD, doesn't have the benefit of OLED, and also it doesn't have VRR like we get on the Allies. But I have to say, using Windows on this bigger, high-res screen is much nicer. The touchpad makes all the difference for navigating around. We get two fast USB 4 ports, one on the top, one on the bottom for flexibility. But like the first gen of all of these, basically, the Legion Go did have some issues at launch, again, with drivers, bugs, crashes, performance not being where it should be. These are all basically first-gen devices in an entirely new category. Only now are we seeing like 1.5 versions of a couple of them. But now the Legion Go is light years better. It's quieter. The UI is great, with plenty of tweaking options and power profiles, although I did get games going into weird-shaped windows sometimes when changing resolution. The grips are nice and comfortable, the buttons feel good, and of course the Legion Go's party trick is its Switch-style detachable controllers. Although possibly my favorite feature is just the simple kickstand. It's the only one with a kickstand. It's very nice, especially when you have the detached controllers and you can use them remotely. What I don't like so much is that the extra size, the extra weight, means it does become less comfortable to hold for longer sessions and also a little bit awkward to carry around. It also needs a 1TB option as well. The 512 gig storage filled up in no time in my testing, plus the SSD isn't the standard 2280 size, so upgrades are a little bit pricier with fewer high capacity options. I also don't think the sound quality is quite as good as the others, thanks to the speakers being on the top rather than facing towards you, and the battery life was, well, second from bottom here, only beating the original Ally. Still though, I really like the Legion Go. It just offers something a little bit different that you don't get on the rivals. The detachable controllers, the flip stand, just this sheer size and beauty of this screen, although as I say again, it's not OLED or VRR. So I really like the Legion Go, genuinely do. I think with the detachable controllers, the kickstand, the size of that screen, having a touchpad here, the UI, it's a much nicer experience than when it was at launch. Really, really good all-rounder. The problem is, among all of these, is that I'm just now a bit spoiled by the battery life on the Ally X. Now, while I do have 6 gaming handhelds on the table in front of me here, there are other options. For example, the AO Neo Kun is an absolute beast with its 8.4-inch screen, dual trackpads, and it kind of feels like a Steam Deck XL, only much, much more expensive. Still, it looks great and I'd love to get my hands on one, but I can't actually buy it here in the UK. Alternatively, there's the Logitech G Cloud, although this is more designed for streaming than gaming on it locally. And if you want handheld gaming on a tight budget, then maybe grab a controller for your phone, like a Backbone or a Razer Kishi. Although that's not really the same thing, is it? I don't want to play mobile games. Speaking of gaming though, while I have these here, how do these compare in terms of performance and real-world gaming? Well, except for the Steam Deck, the processors in these guys all have very similar levels of performance, on paper at least. And I tested each game using the 15 to 17 watt kind of balance mode, and also the circa 25 watt performance preset modes. And most of the time, frame rate difference comes down to the power limit, or the RAM speed, or the cooling systems, and the fan curves. Overall, the Ally X comes out on top by a few frames, with the OG Ally a couple of frames behind that on average, and then the Legion Go behind that. Although the differences aren't significant, but a few extra frames here and there does make the experience feel more polished. The Steam Deck OLED is very well optimized, being able to hit similar frame rates with its lower default TDP as the others at much higher power limits. And it's consistent, you're not seeing as many big frame drops, and also support for FSR 2 and 3 and XeSS in some games means even though the Steam Deck OLED is technically the least powerful, it's still a great gaming experience. As for battery life, well, I ran a looped F1 24 race at 720p and 50% brightness using mid-power modes. The first to drop was the Ally at just 1 hour and 20 minutes. Then the Legion Go at 1 hour 45, followed by the MSI Claw at 2 hours, then the Steam Deck OLED at 2 hours 15, while the ROG Ally X achieved a heroic 3 hours. So the Ally X not only lasts the longest, but is on average the fastest as well. I mean, obviously this is a midlife refresh. We haven't had the benefit of that on the Legion Go or the MSI Claw yet. The Ally X is a very tempting option. We're nearly done, I promise, but just a few quick tips before I wrap up. Number one, go for the biggest storage option you possibly can, because after you've got 3 or 4 games installed, you will easily fill up an internal 512 gig storage drive. So either expand it with microSD, which you can, that is certainly the cheapest way of doing it, and it's kind of like having cartridges where you can have a bunch of games installed on different SD cards and switch them out. You will get slightly lower performance, slightly longer battery times, because obviously the read and write is slower than an internal drive, but try and get the biggest storage option possible or expand it yourself afterwards. Tip number 2, and your battery life can be significantly improved if you cap the frame rate to either 30, 45, or 60 FPS. And if you are playing older or less intensive games, then use the lowest power setting. Tip number 3, get yourself a big external power bank so you can plug in and use these for much, much longer. And also then you can take it out, charge it separately, and you don't always have to carry it around with you. But an external battery can give these guys a big boost to their battery. Tip number 4, have a look at getting a dock. This can help prop up your handheld and also provides extra ports so you can drop it in and use it like a desktop PC, and it opens up a whole new way of using it. Tip number 5, and while you can of course play all your games locally on these devices, don't forget you can also stream your games from GeForce Now or Xbox Cloud Gaming. It is a little bit harder to access this on the Steam Deck OLED, definitely an advantage of going for a Windows-based device, having the different game stores and access to streaming apps. And because you're streaming it, it's not using the internal processor nearly as much, so you'll get much longer battery life. But of course you will need a fast and reliable internet connection, and also these services are subscription-based, so you'll have to pay for them. Tip number 6, use upscaling and also frame generation tech where possible, because more and more games are implementing AMD's FSR2 or FSR3 with frame gen, or Intel's XeSS upscaling tech basically gives you more performance for free. Tip number 7, and if you're playing a game through the Steam library on any of these guys, then use Steam's big picture mode, because that puts you in basically the same UI interface as you get with the Steam Deck and is much nicer to use. Number 8, and handhelds are great for emulating old consoles. It can take a bit of time to set up, but it opens up a whole world of older games. And breathe. That was a lot to take in. Now in terms of whether you should buy one now or wait a little bit longer, well, I think now's as good a time as any. I suspect we won't see new devices from any of these companies until maybe the second quarter of next year, because we still need a new chip to come from either Intel with Lunar Lake or more likely AMD with, say, their Z2 Extreme processor. That's not even been confirmed yet, so as soon as that's available, then we'll have to build the units. So there's no problem with buying one now. But I can't finish this video without telling you which one I would buy. I think if I didn't own any of these, I was going to jump into my first gaming handheld, I would buy the Steam Deck OLED. It's much cheaper, it's a really simple and nice UI, lovely OLED screen. But if battery life is incredibly important and you do often play games from other game launchers and you just want that versatility of Windows, as buggy and slightly awkward to use as it is, then I think the Ally X is an equally good option. I don't think either is better than the other, they just give you slightly different things. But what do you think? Which one would you go for? And if you do own one of these, let me know in the comments below what your experience has been like and whether you'd recommend it to someone else. Thank you so much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed the video, a like and subscribe would be fantastic, and I'll see you next time right here on the Tech Chat.